Now to a potential breakthrough in the Atlantic and the search for debris from that suspected Chinese spy balloon.
Yeah, crews have recovered what military officials called significant debris, including sensors and electronics, as well as large sections of the structure. But this morning, there are still questions about the takedowns of the 3 smaller objects this past weekend. The White House said yesterday those unidentified objects, which it told Congress are most likely balloons, could be for benign commercial or academic research. But the price to shoot them down was not cheap. An Air Force spokesperson says the missiles alone used to shoot down the objects cost at least $2.5 million, and that doesn't even include the cost of scrambling the fighter jets. For more, we're joined by NBC News White House correspondent Mike Mimily and NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Sirkin on Capitol Hill. Good morning to both of you. Mike, let's start with you. The National Weather Service confirmed that none of the objects shot down belong to that agency. And so far, searchers have not been able to find the debris from the 3 objects that were shot down this weekend to try to identify what exactly those were. A lot to unpack. What is the White House saying? What do we know this morning?
Well, Ellison, obviously an important breakthrough, as you mentioned, with the recovery of important component parts from that Chinese balloon off the coast of South Carolina. Officials hope to really learn more about the nature of the Chinese surveillance program based on what they're able to now inspect. But a very different story with those 3 other objects shot down on Sunday. John Kirby from the National Security Council saying that the leading assessment is that these were much smaller than the Chinese balloon. They were flying at a lower altitude and that they may have been, as you mentioned, for benign or commercial purposes. But that's about all that we know. Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, noting yesterday it could be a significant amount of time before officials can recover those objects, one in treacherous weather off the coast of Alaska, the other in the Canadian Rockies, very difficult to reach, and the third is hundreds of feet underwater in Lake Huron. So it could be days, likely weeks, if they're able to recover them at all.
So, Julie, lawmakers both sides of the aisle have been critical of the White House's response to some of these incidents. What do lawmakers think President Biden and the administration should be doing?
Well, plainly, they think that he should be talking to the American people. We heard that all weekend from Republicans and Democrats after this 3rd object was downed. And we heard that all day yesterday when they received a briefing. And then we're going to hear that for the rest of the week from both sides of the aisle. You know, Democrats pushing back a little bit, saying that it's up to Biden to make that decision. Republicans, however, even emerging out of that classified briefing yesterday, saying that this is something they want Biden to do. They want the American people to have answers to the questions they have. The only problem is, and as we learned after that briefing yesterday, it seems like the administration doesn't have all the answers yet. And that's maybe part of the calculation for why they're holding off on speaking to the American public. But look, lawmakers also just want to know if we're prepared to handle this in the future. That's something Senator Tester, a Democrat, had asked in that initial briefing last week. That's something we're continuing to carry throughout this week. People want to know if we're prepared to handle this in the future. Obviously, after that first hearing last week, we saw another 3 of these objects. So clearly, this is something that is not going away. And that's certainly on the thoughts and minds of lawmakers as we head into this day.
And Mike, when you hear the White House saying that 3 of the 4 objects might be commercial or benign, it almost sounds like they're not a very big deal. If they're not a big deal or they're commercial or benign, then why is the White House going ahead with setting up a new task force?
Yeah, Ellison, this is really all about getting parts of the sprawling federal bureaucracy that don't necessarily communicate well with each other at the same table to try to, at the very least, identify what is the nature and the scope of all the stuff, to use the technical term, is up in the air at the moment, especially civilian aviation authorities, the FAA, which monitor the skies, with military stakeholders who secure the sky. And so we have some new reporting from our White House team, Courtney Kuby as well, which is that the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, hopes to have some initial recommendations based on the feedback from these different agencies tonight, and that based on those recommendations to develop some new protocols for just how the government might treat future encounters with unidentified objects in the future. And it's based on those recommendations, which is significant, that we may first hear from the president publicly about all of this. We obviously haven't heard from him. There's been great criticism from both parties about the lack of clarity coming from the White House. And so what the White House officials are telling us is that there are active discussions about when is the right time for the president to speak about this. They don't necessarily want to put him out there until they can have him with some clear answers about how to deal with these situations in the future.
So, Julie, there was a classified briefing held for senators yesterday. What do we know about that briefing? What are we hearing from lawmakers?
Look, we're hearing a lot more questions still than answers, but the good news is lawmakers emerged saying it's not alien, so at least that can be removed from the list. But at the same time, they don't know exactly what these objects are, and this is going to continue into the week. Just today, there's an unrelated hearing in the Commerce Committee with the acting FAA administrator on that system outage that I'm sure a lot of viewers are familiar with that grounded all those flights in the beginning of January. Well, this issue is still expected to come up there. Republicans on the committee, including Senator Marsha Blackburn, is planning to ask the FAA administrator about this, including why Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, was not focused on this, she says. So you could see how Republicans particularly are going to tie this issue in to perhaps every other issue we see that sort of relates to this in any way in the coming weeks and days. And there's another classified briefing for all senators happening later today on China competitiveness with the U.S. in general, on the ground, in the sky, in technology. This is something that was pre-scheduled. We see an increased focus from Congress on China in general when you take away these objects. So obviously all of these aerial objects just increased focus, increased urgency from Congress to put pressure on the administration to make sure they're prepared to act against China in the future. Of course, these last three objects, I should know, we don't know where they came from yet. They could still be for commercial purposes or from another foreign government, but this is clearly something that lawmakers, particularly Republicans, are trying to keep at the forefront.
Lots of questions, but we are crossing aliens off the list, so there's something. All right, Mike Memoli, Julie Sergin, thank you both.